Okay, moving on. We're still working on this A1D1 WinWeb Design database. I want to show you a couple more things in here before we move on. I'm on pages 6 and 7 in your textbook, and I want you to just take a minute, maybe pause the recording, and read through introducing the table section there, talking about table features like the field, what's a field, what's a record, what the data types are, the primary key is, and I'm certainly going to explain that now as well, but sometimes I think it's good for you to do both. So I wanted to look at the customers table again here. So if you could open the customers table, and as you'll see in the book, it's referring to each of these items as a field in your database. And when you have all the fields together, that makes up a record in your database, is really what they say is the collection of your fields. And you'll see when you look at the bottom of your screen here, we have 15 records in this table itself. The other thing I wanted to talk about is what we call the data types in the primary key. To get to that, we need to go to Design View. So on your Home tab here, you're going to click on this little ruler protractor? No, what is that little, anyway, pencil thing here. And we're in Design View then, and this is, you can set up your table this way or you can set it up in the other view, and we'll look at that in the next section here of the book. But you can see that each field in your database has a data type, and most of them right now are short text. You have all these different options as far as what type of field you're looking for. One thing I just want to point out to you is notice that the customer zip code and the phone are short text fields. The reason for that, you might think, well, why wouldn't I make that a number? They have numbers in it. But most of the time, you're not going to make a field a number field unless you're going to use it for a calculation. Because if you make it a number field, you can put nothing else in that field. So for instance, with our customer phone number, we couldn't put parentheses or dashes or hyphens or any of those things in there, or periods if that's how you set it up, if we have it as a number field. Sometimes, in this case, if all of our customers live in the United States, we would have all numbers in our zip code. But some areas like Canada, they have their postal codes, and sometimes you see letters in zip codes or postal codes as well. So unless you're using a number as a calculation, it's a good thing to think about in that's just a good rule to follow. You're going to keep that as short text. Short text just allows you to put anything in there, text, numbers, symbols, or long text. It doesn't matter. But that's usually the data type we're going to use, unless it's a date, unless like in this case for our email, it's a hyperlink. Long text, you can see in this case, allows us to put more information in there. But that's what the data types are doing. They're showing you what type of field it's going to be. The last thing I wanted to talk about here is what's called the primary key. Notice this little key right here tells us the customer ID is the primary key. And if you look at that on page 7, it gives you the definition of a primary key. It is a unique identifier, and that's what I want you to think about all the time. Primary key equals unique identifier. What that means is that when we go back and we look at our customer IDs here, there is no customer ID that's the same. So when we have a customer, you can't have any customer ID that's the same in this case. So notice that we do have this Elsa and John Roberts. They're the same customer, live at the same address. That's why they have the same customer ID. But if you think about that from a student perspective, like you're a student here at LTC, we could never have two students with the same ID number. So the customer, your student ID is what we'd call your unique identifier. What that means is that when you input information to the customer ID field as a student, or as if I go here to employees, and these aren't not the best examples of primary keys, because this would be really hard to continue to make different unique identifiers with initials like this. But for instance, let's go to products table. Each of our products would have a different ID. And by making this field a primary key, if I go to the design view, I can see that this is a primary key here again. That means that anytime I put in a new product here, it would not allow me to give it the same ID as another product. And that's what the primary key does. It makes sure that we have those unique identifiers, like your student ID number, like a social security number, unique identifiers, so that we know exactly who that is, and that there's not going to be any problems with maybe getting people mixed up, or customers mixed up, or products mixed up. The database will not allow you to put the same unique identifier in for two different people, it would alert you to that you've had a problem. So that's what a primary key does for you. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close out this file. So you can go to File and Close, or however you want to do that, or close access, however. And the next thing we're going to do is we're starting on the bottom of page 7. We're going to start with a new blank database. And I just want you to follow along real carefully here, because this is really different in Access. The way that you save is very different. So you're going to go to the new, sorry, I just did it. You're going to go to File, New, Blank Database here. And this is where you want to stop. What happens so often is most people just hit the Create button right away without really knowing what they're doing here. And what's important right here is that this is where you have the opportunity to name your file and tell it where you want to save it. So databases are different in that you save it first and then you work in it. Unlike Word or Excel or PowerPoint, you can open the file, you can work on it till you're done and then save it. So this makes you save right away. So we're going to save this file as A1 D3 datasheet. And I'm going to save mine to my desktop because that's where I have everything going here. I'm going to put it back into my Access Chapter 1 file just because then I'll have all my files for that in the same folder. So click OK. And then you hit Create. So just note that it'll always put this extension in here for you. That's the extension for a database. So important to name it, tell it where you want it to go, and then hit Create to start your database. And this is how we begin our database. So the first lesson we're going to go through are the different ways that you can set up a table in your database. The first way we're going to do it is from Datasheet View. So notice now we have a brand new database. We have nothing in here. It's going to start with giving us a table to start with because we have to put data in here. So the first thing we'll do here is create a new field. So I'm actually going to put this ID in here. We don't want to call this ID. So we're going to double click that. And we're going to type in INVNUM for invoice number. And then when we hit the tab key, it's going to ask us, well, what data type do we want for that? So we're going to choose date and time. And then automatically it moves it over to allow us to put a new field in here. This next field we're going to call INV date, invoice date. Oops. And then hit tab again. And this one, is going to be the date and time field. Okay, I think I might have messed this up here, but we're going to figure that out in just a second. So for this third field here where it says field 1, we're going to type in EMP ID. And then we're going to hit tab again. For the last field, we're going to choose the short text again. And we're going to call this one Cust ID. So when you're setting up your fields in this data sheet view, when you click this button, the first thing you're doing is choosing the field type that you want, and then you're typing in the field name. I might have done that backwards here in the beginning, but we'll find out in just a second. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to save this. And the difference is that when you see, again, a difference between a database and other files is that we already have the files saved. We can see this is called A1D3 datasheet in our database. But every item object we have in here, we also have to save. So this is called table 1. We're going to hit the save button and it's going to ask us what we want to name this table. And we're going to call this table invoices. Click OK. And now I want to go into design view to see if I messed up on my fields. So we're going to click over here on design view. And yep, I did. So this invoice number was automatically chosen for us. It's the primary key. Invoice date should be date and time. But then for an employee ID, I chose date and time, and I should have chosen short text. So we can change that right here. And our last one, customer ID, should have been short text as well. And now we're going to click on data sheet view to go back. And then it's going to ask us if we want to save the table again. And then we'll click yes. Okay, next we're going to go ahead and put in some information here in our database. And if you look on page 8 in your book, you can go ahead and start typing the information here. So our invoice date for our first invoice here, you can either type in the date or you can choose it from here, but since it's 2016, we'll maybe just type it in because that'll be easier. 12/15/2016. And I'm going to go ahead and pause this so you don't have to watch me type all this in, but you can just hit the tab key to move from one field to the next, and then it'll go down to the next record. And notice when you hit tab for this right here, it automatically put in the number 1 here, and then as we move for this next record, it'll also add the number. So go ahead and hit tab, moving through and adding in each of those fields. Okay, now that you've had a chance to enter all those records in, you can see that we should have 4 records here. We'll hit save one more time, and then we'll go ahead and close the table. Again, if you're following in the book, I'm on page 9 in your book, and we're going to go ahead and create a new table through Design View. So in this case, we created the new table just because that's what came up when we started the database. Now we're going to go to the Create tab, and notice we have different groups in here. We have a tables group, we have a queries group, forms, and reports. And in this chapter, we're working with tables specifically. And then as we move through each chapter, we'll get to queries and forms and reports, more detailed for each one. So for this one, we're going to go ahead and hit Table Design. And for our first field name, we're going to type in Cust ID. We're going to tab over, and for the data type, we're going to choose short text. And then in this description box, we're going to choose customer, last name, and first initial. The next field, actually what we're going to do first for this customer ID is we're going to make it the primary key. And to make it a primary key, we're going to click this button right here, and then you can see that little key pops in. The next field then, we're going to type in Cust last name. And again, short text, we'll just keep tabbing through, no description on that. Next one is Cust first name. And again, on page 9 in your book, it has all this information. So I'm just going to pause for a second again and type all this in so you don't have to listen and wait for me to type it all in. All right, now that we have all the fields typed in here, there's a couple changes we're going to make on here. So number 1, I just want to make sure that you did double check to change customer email to hyperlink and notes to long text. Otherwise, the rest should have been short text. We're going to click in the customer last name field, and we're going to change the field size. So notice all these field properties down here. Whenever you click on a field here, you have all these properties you can change down here. We're going to stick with some pretty basic properties to start with, and we're going to change the field size of this just to be 25. I'm thinking that most people will not have a last name longer than 25 characters. If you leave it set to 255 like it was, when databases save, they will always take up a lot of space. So you want to try to find ways to lower the amount of space. And if there's 255 characters, Excel will save space for that. So it's important that you maybe adjust things like this when you can. We're also going to change the caption to be last name. Again, notice all of our field names up here have no spaces in them. And that again is better for any kind of languages that are used in databases. So if we end up dumping this into another database or using it somewhere else, it's better to have no spacing or any type of information that could be difficult to transfer somewhere else. But what the caption allows us to do is put a space in there so that when we are looking at it in datasheet view or in a query or in a report, the name of the field appears as last name. So even though we have Cust last name here, it's going to show up as last name when we're over in datasheet view here in just a second. Okay, so let's go and change some of the other items as well. And again, top of page 10 kind of gives you this whole list of things that we're going to change here. So customer first name we're going to click on. We're going to make that 25 as well. And we're going to put in a caption of first name. We're going to go to street address and make that 25 for the field size as well. And the caption for that is going to be street. And we're going to go to city, click on that, make the field size 15. And the caption city. We're going to go to state, and we're going to make the field size for that too. So we're going to force them to put in an abbreviation, and we're going to put state for the caption. For the zip code, we're going to make that field 5, which might not be the best idea. Maybe 10 actually would be better in case they want to put in the last 4-digit zip code as well. And we're going to call this one zip for our caption. Customer phone, we're going to make that one 15. And we're going to type in telephone. And do people still call these telephones, or do they just call it a cell phone or phone? Anyway, we'll go ahead with the book on that one. And customer email, we're going to not worry about the field size because we don't need to worry about that. And for the caption, we're going to make that email. Now let's go ahead and save this. Notice it's still called Table 1 right here, so it hasn't been saved. I'm going to click the Save button. We're going to call this Customers and click OK. And then we're going to make a couple different changes, but before we do that, I just want to flip over to Datasheet view just to show you. Notice these are our captions here. So even though when we look in design view, we can see that we called this cust last name, our captions are what shows up here in our datasheet view, or if we put this in a report or a query, our captions would show up for the names here. So the last thing we're going to do is add a couple more changes here to our field. So for customer phone, we're going to use what's called an input mask, which is going to put in the dashes and the parentheses for us. So I'm going to click in the input mask box down here, and way over on the right, we're going to click this little button here. And you can see it gives us different options on how we want to see our phone number, but we're going to use this first one. There's nothing else we really need to decide, so we're going to click Finish. And notice this weird looking thing here. We don't have to worry about that. All that means is that when we go to type in the phone number, it's going to put all of the other extra stuff like the parentheses and everything in for us. So we're going to go ahead and go back to Datasheet view. We're going to click Yes to save the table. And we're going to input a couple different fields here. So for customer ID, we're going to type in ANDERS, Anders, Mark, Street, City, State, Florida. And you know, one thing I could try and do here, I'm going to try and type in Florida, and it won't let me. I'm trying to type in the whole name of the state, it will not let me. So that you can see where that field size of 2, it's forcing us to put that in. Telephone, when I start to type it, you'll see that the parentheses and stuff come in, which is so nice. We don't have to put any of that in ourselves. And notice the email automatically is becoming a hyperlink. So go ahead and put in the rest of those fields there. All right, so you have all of those fields typed in there. The one thing I just wanted to show you here, when you're in Datasheet view, if you have things that are being cut off like this, you can adjust the columns by clicking and dragging. You could also double click between those column headings. It'll make it auto fit the contents. We could do the same thing here for the state, the zip. We don't need those to be so big. So anytime you're working in a table like this, that's how you can adjust. I could do multiple fields at one time as well and adjust them. So that's the first part of working in this chapter, is creating tables. So we created 2 tables in this case, 2 different ways. One, doing it here in Datasheet view, and the other one, doing it here from design view. I really prefer doing it this way because there's oftentimes you're going to make some other changes anyway. This makes more sense to me, probably why I stumbled through a little bit of that the first time in Datasheet view. But there are 2 different ways to do it, and it doesn't matter how you do it as long as you get all the information you need in the end.